everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about every book that I read in March, April, and May of this year. This is the spring archive. I hope you already have your favorite beverage with you because we're going to get right into this one. Out there in the pieces, chilling all day with your feet up, don't matter where we go. So good. As you can see, we have quite the pile to get through. I read 15 books this spring, and that's just weird for me. I do keep track of how many books that I read, but it's not like a numbers game for me. It's kind of just like oh wow, like at the end of the year, kind of when you're feeling like not pleased with yourself and you're like, what did I do this year? Well, I read 15 books in the spring. I have an eclectic mix of bookish tastes. So fantasy is obviously my favorite. I love high fantasy, I love fantasy romance, and of course romantasy in small amounts. I also really like art history and philosophy. Some of my favorite aspects of high fantasy books and storytelling in general really has to do with character development. I feel like the more developed a character and an environment or world building, I should say, a book or storyline is, the more likely I am to absolutely fall in love with it, because I as a reader can imagine myself in this world that the author has created. Part of the reason why I can relate so easily to a lot of the characters in the books that I read are because of the philosophy and existentialism that is strewn throughout a lot of these books, as well as art history. So if you're unaware, I did study a little bit of psychology in school, but mainly I went to school for fine art, and so art history is kind of like in my blood. I have family dating back several generations who are artists. Art history has always been a part of my life. My mom and my grandmother on my mother's side were artists as well. And so having that kind of like creative imagination has always been nurtured from a very young age in our house. And so I think a lot of that nurtured creativity and imagination has really transposed itself into my adult life, and that is why I love fantasy books particularly. So while I read a lot of high fantasy, I also like to read a lot of psychology books as well as art history, because there is such an incredible amount of crossover between philosophy and art history in a lot of the fantasy books that I read, and even the historical accuracy of buildings and castles and like what the different cultures did. A lot of it you can pick up in a lot of these high fantasy books. So that is why I really like to read art history and philosophy in tangent with all of the high fantasy that I tend to read. So with that, you are going to see the eclectic mix, the true list of everything that I actually do read that I don't always share online. Before we get into this one, I do have a quick confession to make that I don't actually share every book that I truly read with you guys, because I feel like it was never something you guys were always interested in, but that is changing starting today. So now that we got that over with, now that I've explained why I read so many different kinds of books, let's get into what I actually read. So for the month of May, it's like I don't even know like what month I read these things in. Thank everything. I'm on Storygraph, by the way. If you're unaware, I have Storygraph. I'll put the link below so that you can follow me there. All of my reading archives are actually on my blog, and I separated them out by month in which I read each book. So I'll put the link down below. That way you can kind of see everything that I've read per month. Of course, I'm going to talk about it being separated out here. However, sometimes it's just a lot easier to look online. So here are the 8 books that I read in March. First up, we have Bride by Ellie Hazelwood. Now, this is an edition, I think it was like Owl Crate edition. I did not order it from Owl Crate. It was just randomly sent to me. Yeah, I do have to address the cover because it's very unlike something that I would purchase. I appreciate the different kinds of covers that come out in all these different special editions, but I intentionally didn't want the special edition because of this cover. And what's cool though, I didn't know, it is signed by the author, which I thought was really cool. So Not my favorite cover, but hey, it is a signed copy and I love that. So Bride was the first paranormal romance that I read. This is like a contemporary paranormal romance, I will argue, in that it's set in current day. And the female main character, she is a journalist and her best friend and roommate goes missing. So our FMC is a vampire and she's part of a big vampire family that's very old, that has been kind of like ruling part of the town that is split, and half of it's ruled by the vampires and the other half is ruled by the opposing werewolf pack, and the alpha runs the other half of the town. And both the vampires and the werewolves live in sync with the humans as well. And they're kind of all, the three of them are trying to keep peace between the different races. So our FMC, she's kind of like the rogue one of the vampire clan, the vampire family, and she lives amongst the humans. She has a human bestie roommate who lives with her, and suddenly the bestie goes missing. And so she is really trying to like get to the bottom of like, well, what happened to my best friend? And in the meantime, her vampire father essentially wants to marry her off, and he really thought that he would have a hard time telling her to go marry the leader of the opposing alpha pack, because they're really trying to keep the peace between the vampires and the werewolves. And to her father's surprise, she's like, okay, fine, I will go, because she thinks that the leader of the wolf pack is the one who took her best friend. So by marrying him, she is going to have access to all of the security cameras and all of the other people in the wolf pack to try and see if she can find out what happened to her best friend. Lo and behold, of course, they end up falling in love, and I can't tell you what actually happens with the best friend because there's a couple twists and turns in it. Now, paranormal romance isn't really my jam, but it's not a bad thing. Like, at first I thought I was really not gonna like it because it's a bit much for me. I guess I really prefer like historical fiction. But when you think of it in terms of, if you ever saw the movie or the TV show Grimm, how it's set in like contemporary times, but then they bring back all of these like fantastical kind of scenes and whatnot from fairy tales, it was a lot easier for me to read this in thinking of, oh, this is just another episode of Grimm or something. So I'm not sure if I'm going to read book 2, Mate, which was released earlier this year as well, and people were raving about it. I'm not going to say no, but I am going to say maybe just not right now. So I will most likely read Mate, but I'm gonna wait a little bit until later in the year and see where I am and how I feel about it. I did enjoy this book. If you love contemporary paranormal romance books, I do recommend this one. It was a really quick read, very enjoyable. Next up, continuing with the theme of werewolves, is The Wolf King by Lauren Pelfraven. Phenomenal. I could not put this book down. I think I read it in an afternoon and it was so good. I loved how fast-paced it was, or maybe it wasn't fast-paced, but I just read it really, really fast. This follows the story of the female main character who kind of escapes her realm. She wants to get out of this horrible arranged marriage that she does not want to be a part of. So this book opens up on the FMC's eve before her wedding. There's like a huge feast in a hall, and there's like live action fighting between werewolves and like other creatures and monsters and humans, and it's kind of like a Colosseum style fight to the death, and she hates it. She doesn't want anything to do with this. It makes her sick. She wants to get out. And so to spite her fiance that she's gonna have to marry tomorrow, and she absolutely hates the situation, she finally calls on mercy for this one warrior who she kind of had the hots for. And so she says, hey, spare him, please. I'm done with all this bloodshed. This is supposed to be a time of happiness. I'm getting married tomorrow. Like, I just don't want to get married and have all these people die for my honor. And so they say fine. After the haughty prisoner is taken down back to the dungeons, she follows him down there, and she kind of says like, hey, I brought you food, kind of provisions. And then he says, I'm escaping this dungeon tonight and you need to come with me because I can clearly see you do not want to be here. She didn't want to be here. And she says, okay, fine. So they escape and the story unfolds, and it is so good. I enjoyed it. I was smiling. I laughed out loud. There's some really witty comments in this one, which I think is excellent. Like, laughter is so well appreciated in all of these crazy books that I read. It was excellent. In fact, I know I'm showing you all of these in reading order, but I love this book so much, in fact, that later on in March, I actually picked up The Night Prince when it was released on release day and read it in the same night. These two books are so good. I loved the pacing. I loved all the storyline, especially the ending of this one. Yes, The Night Prince was excellent. I love how Lauren has brought everything together in The Night Prince. I love watching the characters develop from one book to the other, especially when there's a lot more uncertainty that happens. And you know you're going to get a really good book when there's a lot more emotion that is being shared with the characters, with the reader, from book 1 to book 2. I think the development is just so much better. It's stronger. I love how incredibly complex book 2 became, because then you just kind of think of, oh, what did I miss in book 1? I'm gonna have to go back and reread it. Excellent, excellent book. I highly recommend both of them. The third book, The Wolf Queen, is being released, and I forget when. It'd be sweet to get an ARC copy of this one, but your girl can dream, and I'm gonna dream because I can. Highly recommend if you like historical romance. This is kind of like set in like the northern kind of Scottish Highlands territory is kind of the vibe that I got. Go ahead and pick them up if you have not already read them. Next up, I read The Studies in the History of the Renaissance by Walter Pater. Now, this is an art critique history book, and it is written in 1873, and it is critiquing fine arts throughout the like 16th, probably like 15th and 16th centuries. This was written in the Victorian era, and it critiqued everything that was created and produced back in the Renaissance. And if you are unfamiliar with Walter Pater, he was a very famous art critic back in the Victorian era. Specifically, this one was written in 1873. And he's really famous for the conclusion of this one, where he goes off and says that art is meant to be experienced, essentially. So it's not about how well the piece is painted, the technique, it's not how expensive it was just how you feel and how you emote when you experience a piece of art. Whether it is a very fine piece of art, such as the Sistine Chapel, or if it's like a basic piece of pottery that you picked up somewhere that was handmade. But it's about really digging in and recognizing the emotions and your connection to how a piece of art was produced, and the colors, and how it sinks in, and how you interact with these particular pieces. This is like one of the classics for art history. If you went to fine art school, or if you're going to fine art school, you will be reading you are going to be reading Walter Pater. I almost guarantee it. This is the first time I've ever read Studies in History of the Renaissance in its entirety. I've read several excerpts from this particular piece as independent essays. It was really cool to read everything in chronological order as it was intended to be presented. The art nerd in me was like all over this book. So if that's your jam and you enjoy reading perhaps Gothic literature, because there is literature that is also mentioned in here, or just fine arts in general, I do recommend this classic piece. Whew. All right, we are halfway through March. Let's keep going. Next up, I read A Crown of War and Shadow by J.R. Ward. This is J.R. Ward's first romantasy novel. It's also my first experience or first introduction with J.R. Ward's writing. From what I understand, she is a prolific romance writer. The book community went bananas when J.R. Ward said, hey, I'm writing a fantasy book too. Of course I had to read this. Her writing style is very unique. I like it. This story follows an FMC who is very unique. She lives in a village in a tavern under the stairs. She earns her keep as a maid in the pub. However, when a child is born, she is brought forth, so she's kind of like a doula or like a midwife, and she kind of comes forth and like helps birth the babies. But she has a secret that only a few people know about, and that is she will see when and how you will die if she looks you in the eyes. She doesn't really look at anybody because she doesn't want to see how they pass, but she's paid for this service, particularly with children, because it's during a time when the birth rates are very low, and so a lot of people really will have her come and help with the babies to ensure that they do everything in their power to make the children live and survive. The king finds out about her ability and he wants to collect her because it's illegal. She ends up fleeing her village with a stranger that she kind of has no choice but to trust at this point, because he's a very strong warrior, and it was recommended that she leaves with him by somebody else who was very close to her that passed away in the village. They have this quest. She has to unite a crown that she was given with a famous warrior in another realm, because they're the last ones that can help against the darkness that is kind of encroaching in the world. So it reminds me of something from like Bone and Shadow. Like I envisioned this wall of darkness and storm clouds and drakes flying around, and this is kind of like what is happening. At least I can, in my mind, that's what I see. So they find this person that is supposed to help them wear the crown and defeat all of the shadow, only they deny it. They don't want anything to do with this crown because apparently it's like really bad and super evil. And so our FMC's main quest has kind of come to an end, and she's kind of feeling really defeated. So she decides to try and learn how to defeat the darkness on her own. So they go travel back to her realm, the village with a pub, and something happens in a nearby shrine, which I'm not going to give away. But the ending of this one, did not see that coming. I mean... Did I see it coming? No, I did not see the ending coming on this one. But I did see something. You know, I love all the little Easter eggs that kind of happen here and there. And you're like, I think this is going to happen. And it does. And sometimes it doesn't. This one had a couple little Easter eggs that I picked up on. And I thought, oh, I think this is going to happen at the end. And holy crap. I love it when authors put like this big twist and like this big dramatic end to a book or a story. It makes me happy. Like I'm not mad, I'm not angry, I'm not sad about like these crazy endings. In fact, I'm really, really into them. This is book 1, and I'm not entirely sure when book 2 is coming out, but whenever it does, I will definitely pick it up because this was a lot of fun to read. Next up, we have The Wings That Bind by Briar Bolin, and this is the penultimate in the Bloodwing Academy series. This one picks up right where the other two left off. Our FMC is kind of taking a backseat to this one, and it's her friend that kind of becomes the FMC of this particular book, because her friend has to play a very important role with the dragons and the dragon story in this one. I have a feeling that book 4 is going to be more about the person. Gosh, what do I say? I don't want to give it away. I don't want to give this away. I liked how The Wings That Binds kind of went away from the academy setting. I mean, they're still at the academy, but it's not as like class focused. I feel like the setting of the Bloodwing Academy mirrored a lot of Harry Potter and Hogwarts in terms of the different trials and tribulations that the students had to face as they were navigating their years at Hogwarts. It's kind of a similar situation here at Bloodwing Academy. So this book, we kind of veer away from the main school academic focus, whilst they're still actually at Bloodwing Academy. We have a lot more political influence kind of encroach upon the castle and the academy grounds. In particularly, there's somebody that was really snotty in the first couple books that now she's in charge, which sucks. And her mates, her husband, her betrothed, I'm not sure, I forget if they married or not. She's now like stepmom, and it's a bad situation. And yeah, so this is about the FMC's best friend who really steps up and steps into her own. Not quite a la Samwise Gamgee style as far as like the intensity, but she really does step up into herself. And you know what? Something happens between the dragon and her, and I'm not going to get far, like too much into it because I hate giving stuff away. Like, I'm not going to do a big spoiler on this channel. That's just not me. And the ending was really sad. I'm sad. The ending was a big bummer, but it really kind of like left you with, now what? Like, I don't know how to explain that other than that kind of feeling, that like kind of heaviness that sets in your chest and you're like, man, this is not going to be good. I'm definitely waiting for book 4, which I am definitely going to pre-order as soon as that comes out. I am enjoying the series. I wasn't that crazy at the beginning, and I knew that this was going to be the last like academy academic setting, which I will eat my own words because clearly it wasn't. And you'll see later on in this video that yeah, no, it's not the last one, and it probably won't be for a while. But anyways, I do recommend Bloodwing Academy if you like that academic setting. You're a big fan of Hogwarts, but this one has lots of dragons in it, and also shape shifters and transformations happening amongst different people and dragons. So go ahead and pick this one up. Very, very good. The next book I read is The Life and Legacy of Jane Birkin, It Girl, and this is by Marissa Meltzer. This one is a guilty pleasure of mine because clearly it is not fantasy. It's not isn't exactly art history, and it's not philosophy, but it's more like pop culture. So yes, this follows Jane Birkin. If you know the Birkin bag, this is her. She also was married to Sergei Gainsbourg. She did produce some music. She was in theater and film, and I had no idea about that aspect of her. This biography was written based on interviews alone, acquired by the author. I thought it was really good. Every once in a while, I do like biographies. Sometimes I just need to take an absolute break from the high stakes of all of this fantasy. This definitely was a nice break for me. So I have a guilty pleasure of pop culture from the 60s and 70s, and Jane Birkin probably was arguably one of the most famous women of that time in that era. And it was really interesting to read a little bit more in depth about her life and her legacy and what she did and what she thought about what other people thought of her work that she supplied. Particularly, she enjoyed live theater, which I didn't know she was in the live theater, and then a lot of different movies as well. She has 2 daughters that are also famous actresses, and she had a 3rd daughter that tragically passed away, which I was unaware of. Not that I'm a huge Francophile, but I thought this book was a really interesting insight into Jane Birkin and her life and what happened immediately afterwards. So this book was recently written in, I want to say 2023. This was written last year, 2025. It's very enjoyable if you are a fan of Jane Birkin or a Francophile in general. And the final book that I read in March is The Art Instinct by Dennis Dutton. This book has been on my TBR for literally 20 years. Yes, like 20 years. And it was gifted to me, like 14 years ago, something like that. I've owned this book for so long, and I just never read it. Until I got to the ending part of this book, and yes, I have read it because I annotated it, but I didn't remember this book, so I'm gonna call it, this is my first time ever reading this book and thoroughly, and that's okay. So this is another art history critique, evolutionary psychology book, because Dennis Dutton kind of goes through and gives a lot of examples of evolutionary psychology and why we enjoy certain types of art that we all do, not just here in a particular region, but also just across the entire world as humans. And he argues that a lot of that has to do with the way that we kind of have a lot of similar preferences in fine art, such as a blue sky, a sparkling blue ocean, because a lot of those features that are in fine art and the landscapes and stuff that we so much enjoy all relate back to survival mode. Back when we were early Homo sapiens, kind of evolving over the grass plains, etc., etc. And I really enjoyed how he went through and made the arguments for that. They're very believable. Some of them not so much, but for the most part, there's a lot of really good stuff in here. He makes an argument that there are 12 cross-cultural criteria in which almost every tribe of person across the entire globe shares, which I thought was really interesting. But he also argues that the imaginative experience is the most important aspect of that. And he also went on and gives multiple examples in this book about not just the 12 pieces of criteria that make art or like verifies a piece of art as being art. He talks about how it's about what we do and how we've evolved from just recognizing survival mode cues in our everyday life into seeing like how we can take those survival cues and make us experience not a sense of flight while we're experiencing the piece of art. So walk with me. For example, like on the cover of this one, there is a waterfall, we have grassland plains, we have mountains, we have deciduous trees. We know that there's depth, so we have to go up into the mountain for survival mode, etc., etc. There's trees, maybe we can chop them down, make a house. There's fresh water, supposedly fresh water. So we have some sort of survival resources accessible to us in this one, and then we have the planes in which we can see potential predators encroaching upon where we are in an encampment. The final critique that Dennis Dutton would say is, but it's just beautiful. Look at the color of the light. So we kind of get to ignore our instinctual survival cues that this painting does represent, and we just can appreciate it for the beauty, the color of the lighting of everything. You know, where are the shadows? What's the depth of field in this painting? Look at the fine tuning of the strokes on the paintbrush that the artist used to make all of the details on here. He says that is like one of the biggest key things that we as a species have done to evolve into appreciating art form for what it is today. And this book was a lot to chew on, and I enjoyed that piece. I enjoyed his arguments. There's a few examples that he added in here, which, I mean, it's 2026, so they're not super impactful as they would have been when this book was written, but they are still valid. Yes, I did enjoy this. I'm so proud of myself. I finally read it, despite it being like with me on so many moves and this and that. If you're interested in art history, this is another really good key one to kind of help bring in a different perspective. Here we go. Now let's talk about April. First up, I read 7 Deadly Thorns by Amber Hamilton. It's one of the books that I picked up on Independent Bookstore Day. This is a YA standalone romance, and I had a lot of fun with this one. This is not a book that I wouldn't have picked this one out for myself, gotta admit it. So it was really fun doing a blind date with a book. This one is about an academic setting. There are these mists that surround the castle, which is the school, the academy. The mists are bad. If you inhale the mists, you die instantly. And there are magical wards that are warding the mists away from this castle. Everyone from the surrounding village is actually down deep within the castle underneath, and they've also burrowed down under the castle and kind of built like an underground city because of the mists. And the mist won't get to the underground city. Our main character, she is actually from the underground city, and it's an awful place to be because there's stale air, you know, there's food shortages, but up above, they're living large in the castle. So you have the royal family, you have all of the knights, you have all of the lords and ladies, and they're living it up while everybody down below is suffering. And our female main character was chosen as a student to go to this academy. So she meets the MMC, and they realize that they have to work together to fight off the mists. And the ending was so good. This is a standalone, and it made me sad. It really tugged at my heartstrings. I did not anticipate it would be like this, and it makes sense though. It's very sad, but it has a really good, like, the ending I think was very fitting. I'm so used to fantasy books taking place in like other realms, other worlds. This book, the story takes place almost entirely inside of a castle, like the whole time. You don't have to really worry about running to different worlds, which I'm not used to in a fantasy book, and I thought it was really good. I liked the concept. I thought the story itself was very lovely. The ending was, man, totally tugged at my heartstrings. But it was good. It was good. It makes sense. There is another book that kind of goes off from here, I'm assuming. I'm not sure. They're in the same world, probably the same castle, but I don't know what happens afterwards. But this is a standalone, so we only have our MMC and our FMC in this one book by itself. I do recommend this if you enjoy like a fairy tale aspect to it as well, kind of like Snow White, I will say. There is an evil mirror in this one, and it was a really fun take on bringing in a fairy tale to this fantasy academy. Go and pick it up. Next up, I read Rites of the Starling by Devney Perry. This book I had been waiting for a long time, and I'm so glad I waited. So Rites of the Starling is book 2 in the Shield of Sparrows series, and Shield of Sparrows was incredible. It was fast-paced, I loved the story, and I had been waiting for this one to come out for a long time. And I will say, the initial disappointment that a lot of people in the book community were given this book, and it's like, why? You know? Look, you have a second FMC that's introduced in this book who's related to book one. And of course, I'm not going to give out, I'm not going to give away anything for what actually happens in The Rites of the Starling. Oh my goodness. One line, only with one line, Devney Perry was just like, I'm pulling the rug out from under you. And it was like, oh. And I was like, yes, finally. Like, there was one point midway through the book and I'm like, what the hell? Like, what am I reading? Like, are they going to be like separate? Like, why isn't this person meeting? And then you're like, oh, exactly. I'm pretty sure I let out like an audible, elongated, like, gasp when I read this one line, and it was excellent. I loved this book. I will say, I wish we got a little bit more on the back end, just to kind of like set up a little bit more leading into book 3. But hey, you know what? I am so happy with this book. I really want to see like what happens in book 3. Yeah, there's a lot of questions that were answered in this book, but it leads to, of course, like bigger ones that you still need answered. So my biggest advice with Rites of the Starling is you have to be patient with it. And you have to really take your time because there's so much explained. All like tons of questions that we had in the first book, which is Shield of Sparrows, are answered in this book. But you have to know what is actually happening, and you have to be able to pick up on it and understand what is going on. I do recommend rereading Shield of Sparrows, just kind of like briefly, kind of give it a quick run through before you go through the Rites of the Starling, because there are several key moments in Rites of the Starling that are answering a lot of stuff in Shield of Sparrows. So be patient, get your notebook and pens out, because this one is answering a lot for you, and then you kind of can go down the rabbit hole towards the end. Pick it up, it's excellent. Next up, I read The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. This is a standalone book, and it's written by a woman from Brazil back in the 70s. Oh gosh, I think this one was written more recently though. So Clarice Lispector was a journalist in Brazil, and she would write these short stories pretty much about life in Brazil and like the Brazilian slums, and kind of gave insight into the culture of the slums and kind of this feeling of hope and despair, and really fine-tuned all of the emotions that somebody would experience while they're living in poverty in 60s, 70s, 80s Brazil. Not the biggest, brightest thing, you know? This is my first time ever reading Clarice Lispector's work. The story is about a woman who lives in the slums of Brazil and who doesn't feel like she fits society's expectations on what a woman should look like and how she should work and how she should speak. By society standards, according to the woman, she's ugly. All she wants to do is be a movie star, and she wants to be loved. It has a tragic ending, not gonna lie. But this book is written from the perspective of a male who is admiring this young woman from afar, and all of her insecurities and all of her quirks and all of her things and characteristics that she feels makes her ugly, he actually really likes. So this is my first foray into Clarice Lispector's work, and I know she's very, very well loved and well known in the contemporary fiction community. And I say contemporary fiction because even though it's from like a long time ago, her impact of her writing has really influenced a lot of people. And I will say that I understand and I can appreciate, you know, what Clarice's work is, but I will say that I get it, I appreciate it, but it just wasn't so, I wasn't like so deeply moved by this, and I think it's because I am desensitized due to all of the, I will argue, even worse things that happened so far in real life from the time that this book was written to current day. So there are far worse things that have happened, and while I know that the impact of this book is very important because of how much awareness this book brought to people at the time that the story was written. Again, I feel that there has been just way like harder, tougher stories and situations that have happened around the world since. because now we have so much access to what life is really like in slums or impoverished areas, etc., etc. And so I appreciate it. It's a good piece of work. It's good literature. I think you should read it if you like that kind of thing. I would like to read a few more of Clarice's pieces because I feel like this is just like a small sample. This was the last book that she ever wrote before she passed away, and so this is just like a final sampling of what she, how much work that she produced during her journalism career. I enjoyed this. I appreciate it. I wasn't as deeply moved as most people are, but if that is your thing, then I do recommend you pick this up. And I am going to go ahead and pick up a few more of her books just so that I can kind of say, like, okay, if I enjoy her writing or if it's just not for me. Now, her writing style is very unique, and I do really like that. So perhaps it was just the story that didn't kind of, I don't mean to sound like heartless or anything, but like it didn't particularly move me, but maybe one of the other ones would. So I'm going to go ahead and read a couple more of her pieces, and then I'll come to a conclusion. So we are at the last book that I read in April, and that is Starside by Alex Astor. This one I also picked up for Independent Bookshop Day, and I went into it completely blind. No idea what it was about. Kind of saw other influencers who received the art copy. It actually had like a physical sword that kind of looked like this, which is what I use for putting up my hair. But the physical sword was like on the front of the book cover, and I thought, shoot, that was so cool. Like, I want a book with a sword on it. So I just picked up Starside by Alex Astor during Independent Bookshop Day haul, kind of when I hopped around to different bookshops. It blew me away. I am not gonna lie. I completely did not anticipate it being this good. Not that I had doubts because I went into it blind, but I'm like, I don't know. It might be a bit much. This is from what I understand, this is actually Alex Astor's first adult romance fantasy book, and I think it was very well put together. It's Hunger Games meets the Fellowship of the Ring traveling through Middle-earth to get to Mount Doom, if that makes sense. It was very interesting. So the very beginning kind of opens up with like a time trial, and you have to like qualify to be one of the 50 warriors that are allowed across this great wall in order to find this magic cup of elixir, so that either you drink it and you become one of the members of the King's Guard, or you know, you can bring back the magic and you can give the magic back to the village. So Starside and Stormside are separated by this giant wall that opens up only every 50 years. When it's like the year that the wall will be opened to new warriors, it opens up with our FMC in the very beginning of her having to fight her way up to this platform so she gets an opportunity to get through the wall. The story goes on, so she gets to go to Starside. This book has like this crazy journey of her going through, and she's meeting all these people along the way and creatures and situations where she's trying to get to the cup of magic. Oh, I don't want to give this away. She may or may not get the cup of magic, but she ends up coming back to Stormside, and something happens when she's coming back through at the very end, and we're like, whoa, that we kind of have to wait another 50 years for. Or do we? I don't think we do. So book 2, Stormside, comes out later on this year, and within 30 minutes of finishing Starside, I ordered Stormside, because you know what? I am not waiting for this. I am not waiting for this, and I loved this story so much. If you like more of like action, adventure, blood and gore, you know, I'm definitely more of a blood and gore girl, like when it comes to my fantasy, so that's why I like high fantasy. But if you like a lot of like action, adventure, you know, with the romance being more of a subplot, I do recommend this book. So go pick it up if you haven't read it already. Excellent. Absolutely excellent. And that's what I read in the month of April. And finally, here is what I read in the month of May. First up, I read Simone de Beauvoir's The Ethics of Ambiguity, and this was written in 1947. This is a piece of existentialism or philosophy book, and ultimately de Beauvoir argues in order to achieve true freedom, one must battle against the choices and activities of those who suppress it. It's very appropriate for today's day and age. She was kind of in the group with Jean-Paul Sartre, F. Scott Fitzgerald, this famous group of writers, philosophers, and together they collectively kind of came out with a lot of pieces that created a lot of impact and culture in Europe as well as America. And I really enjoyed this one. Again, it's one of those philosophy books that kind of brings to light a lot of things. This book had a lot of points on we ourselves are capable of freedom of the mind and oneself, and that we're the only ones that are kind of like holding our own selves back from loving and from experiencing and from creating in the way that we want to. So there was a lot of good points in here that she makes. Again, it's one of those like cultural pieces of literature that I feel like everybody should read at least once. I really enjoyed this. If you enjoy philosophy, existentialism, as well as like art history, I'll argue that this has a little bit of art history because she does bring forth a couple artists in this book as well because she knew them. I like reading these kinds of philosophy books in between a lot of this high fantasy because a lot of it is very relevant into the character development of, you know, why certain characters make decisions based on certain actions against their own will. And so this book kind of brought in a little bit more insight into that, and I thought this was excellent. I really enjoy her writing. I love her work, and I will most definitely be reading more of it in the future. We are on to the last two books that I have read for spring. Like, I don't know where to begin with these guys. So these books are book 1 and 2 of the Moonfall series. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm referencing When the Moon Hatched and Ballad of Fallen Dragons, both by Sarah A. Parker. Holy fuck. First off, I would like to talk about my fancy pants edition of When the Moon Hatched. It came from the UK because it was unavailable at retail price here in the US, and I was not paying 4 times the price for it online as from a secondary seller. Like, no. So I paid regular price from it and had it shipped for me across the pond, which I thought was really cool. So I just thought you should know. When the Moon Hatched is probably one of the best stories I have read in a very long time. Like, I don't even know where to begin with this. I do. Let's start at the beginning. The beginning has an epilogue that kind of sets up this world and kind of what happened years ago. And we get the origin of the world. And it's so beautifully and poetically written. It's gorgeous. We have all these gods who created the world, and there's one god, Kalis, who essentially was imprisoned in this ether stone. There is a family whose women are entrusted to wear this ether stone on a diadem across their forehead. And when one woman dies, the ether stone suddenly like unlatches itself from the woman's forehead and is placed onto the new female of the line, and it attaches itself to her forehead. And essentially the ether stone is housing something. I don't want to give it away. There's that. And one of the favorite creatures that that the gods created were dragons. And when a dragon goes to die, it usually saves up enough energy so that it can fly itself out of gravity and form it into a little ball, into a moon, and it hardens and it becomes a moon. That's the background. Our FMC is an assassin, essentially, and she had a pretty rough history. She was in some fighting pits, indentured slave to fight, and she escaped the fighting pits, and now she is an assassin. So she has to fight because she made a blood oath with this like ringleader, essentially. She desperately wants to escape the ringleader. Well, she does, and she goes off on this adventure, and the story unfolds, and you're just like, holy shit, like, where did this come from? I didn't even expect any of that. It was incredible. I read this book because I knew that Ballad of Fallen Dragons book 2 was coming out, and if I liked this book, then I would just pre-order Ballad and have it delivered on release day. And within like the first 100 pages of reading When the Moon Hatched, I ordered Ballad of Fallen Dragons. If you have not noticed already in the book world, This book has pretty much like broken the internet, and it should. I wholeheartedly approve of that because of the continuation of what happened in book 1 became just more complex, and Sarah's writing style just expanded. It's so good. So this took like an extra, like, I think this took about 2 years to write, which is great, you know. They can take however long to write, as long as it's what they wanted to get down on paper. I'm gonna argue that this book has romance as a subplot. There's a quote for the series, and I forget what it is, but it's about like love across time, and time plays a very important role. Now, there's not really time travel in this book, but it's memories of what happened in the past that come forth, that are so impactful of what is happening in the current time of this book. I was telling my husband the other day that the way that this story has unfolded really reminds me of something from Final Fantasy. If you've ever played the game Final Fantasy, you know, 1 through 14, and that kind of like emotional journey that you go on as far as the complexity, and one thing leads to another, and then suddenly you're like, oh my god, I don't want this to end. Like, that is when the moon hatched. And I didn't personally play Final Fantasy, but I feel like I did because I watched my husband play it, and so I'm very familiar with a lot of the storyline. I was telling my husband, I'm like, you would like this series because it plays like Final Fantasy. There's some spicy scenes, but I mean, there's not a whole lot, in my opinion. It's the actual story of what is happening with the dragons, the moons, and the forthcoming war. Because you know what? I love gore and war in a fantasy book. And I don't know why. I think it's because it's just so much action and high stakes. It brings out the worst in people, but sometimes it also brings out the best in people. I like that because not everything in life is all golden hunky-dory. I enjoy all the action. Yeah, I know this thing where it's like, oh, 6 stars, God tier. This is like, burn this with me when it's so good. And you know what? I'm really looking forward to having time to reread both of them again, because I only read them like, I think 4 days apart. When book 3 comes out, supposedly it's going to be the last one. I don't know. I don't care. I am already looking forward to rereading these because I know there's going to be so much more that I'm going to pick up on, and I'll be like, my mind will be blown all over again. If you like Final Fantasy, read these books. And if you don't like the romance in here, you can just like skip ahead of them. Like, it's fine. You don't need the spicy bits to really understand the story because the story is incredible. I can't believe I'm saying this, but that is it, guys. This is all 15 books that I read in spring of 2026. If you kind of want to like look a little bit more in depth into each book, they are available in my archive on my blog. I will leave the link below. You can do a little bit more research into any of these books that I have listed here, as well as past archives and other books that I read in different months. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye!